to,
There's no indicator that shows the volume too high or too low.
no, I have it set because I
Alright,
tested it
you're
before.
fine.
So, okay, is this the original home that you lived in when you came to Auburndale?
It is not. We lived in two other homes before that.
And where
When
they?
when we came to Auburndale in the fall of 1937, we rented a rented a flat in a two-family house on Commonwealth Avenue, which is still standing, number 2033 Commonwealth, which is right across from the Star Market. In those days, across from the house was a large greenhouse, later a lumber yard. That 2033 Commonwealth probably was built in the 1920s and was the nicest two-family house I ever saw anywhere. Easy to heat. We used to heat with coke. It had a steam, I believe it was hot water boiler. And we burned coke. No coaching from the audience, please. But it was a nice apartment. They had a Chippendale bathtub on legs.
Oh, that's
And
nice.
we had to turn on the hot water heater to do the dishes. Better kill that.
Just for a second.
My memory has been refreshed that we paid $35 rent. But as apartments went in those days, that wasn't especially low, but that was about the going rate. And Commonwealth Avenue in those days no longer had the streetcar tracks that had run from Lake Street to Bigger Park, but it still had the carriage road on the north side and two-way traffic on the south side. The second house we lived in, and we lived there for 2 years from 1937 to 1939, and here's one example of the change in customs in Newton. The reason we moved was because after 2 years in Newton and getting along without a car, we finally felt we could afford an automobile, but we had no place to park it.
Oh.
And now, when I go by that same house, I notice they parked 3 cars right in the yard. Well, that was unthinkable in those days. It just wasn't done. So we had to find a house with a garage, and we found a single house on Islington Road, corner of Duffield Road, which had a garage, and that we lived there for 2 years from fall 1939 till the winter of 40, or winter, probably winter of 40. I'll reconstruct that when I get to it. But the Duffield Roadhouse, Islington Roadhouse, corner of Duffield, was across from the back of Norumbega Park. And Norumbega Park is, almost anybody who remembers the totem pole knows, a very popular recreation area. And Mr. Gill, who lived on Islington Road, just next to the corner of the Commonwealth, next to the playground, had a very good sense of public relations. I was very aware of the abutters. And anybody who lived near the borders of the Norumbega Park was given a season pass. Well, that didn't mean so much on the use of the park because the admission price was pretty low, but it also gave us unrestricted admission to the Totem Pole Ballroom. So we took our pass in hand, both about 30 years old then, and went down to the Totem Pole Ballroom, and we stood around for half an evening and then went home. We were just too old for that crowd. and that was in 1939. We had been looking for a house to buy, and at that time, our resources were even more limited than they are now. didn't know where I could put my hands on $1,000, which would serve as a down payment on a house in those days. The banks would like to have a third down, but sometimes they'd settle for a quarter, and sometimes they might even go as low as 20%. And so if we had $1,000 and we could get a house with 20% down, that meant we could buy a house for $5,000. So we went to a few real estate agents and bought a house for $5,000, and they laughed at us. The Doris College, I found a house in Newton for under $7,000, $8,000. But in the fall of 40, we heard of a house available in Auburndale and at Fort Ware Road. And we came and looked at it, and it was pretty fancy compared to what we had. And the joke was that the house was listed with every real estate agent in Newton for $7,500, and nobody had suggested to the owner that he might come down if he wanted to make a sale, because real estate was not moving in those days. And we met the owner. We heard of the owner through old Mr. Leonard who ran a market in Auburndale, right about where the Auburndale Cooperative Bank is now. And we'd moved our sights up a little, though we might go to $6,000. So we met the Beamishes who run a market in Newton Corner and were retiring in California. And I remember standing right in front of the fireplace here and saying, Mr. Beamish, what's your rock bottom price? And Beamish says, there's no real estate agent involved. And I said, no, they've all given me the brush off. So he said, well, seeing there's no commission, I'll let you have it for $6,000. I said, well, that's my top price. Let's do business. So that's how things went in those days. So we had the 2 years on Commonwealth Avenue. We had almost 2 years on Islington Road. And as I recall, we bought this house in March of 1941. One of the things I remember about that period, I wasn't so much aware of it on Commonwealth Avenue as I was when we came up here on Ware Road, which was on the corner of Melrose Street. And as you can see, Ware Road is sort of the backwater, but Melrose Street has quite a bit of traffic on it. When it snowed, a man would come through with a horse on the sidewalk and a triangular snowplow made of heavy planks. In those days, they may not have done such a good job of cleaning the streets, but they did a lot better job of cleaning the sidewalks. Want to take time off for that?
No. I was just wondering if you made any major changes on this home, any renovations or anything like that.
Well, the house was in very good shape when we bought it. One change we made was when we bought the house, they had the sunroom has a flat roof, and there was a railing around it, and people had put a sort of semi-permanent awning over it, so it made an upstairs veranda. People would sit out there in the summertime. They had cut a door through, Shane converted one of the bedroom windows into a door, and we struggled with that woman door for years. We never used the upstairs porch, the gardens, maintenance. And so probably about 25 years ago, I converted the doorway back into a window. Inside the house, we modernized the kitchen. I suppose now it would be considered modern, but it seemed to be modern 25, 30 years ago. And about 15 years ago, we had the bathroom modernized, which was a professional job. They put some of the valves in backwards.
Oh.
Those things happen. That's about the extent of we still have the original heating plant. This house was built in either 1926 or 1927. But builder named Jim Silver, who really did a good job. We have gravity hot water heat, and the original boiler was coal, and it had been converted to oil by the time we bought the house. In fact, I think it was converted to oil a few years after it was built. But during the war, when oil was rationed, I was really concerned about keeping the house warm enough. I put the grates back in, and we converted to coal. And then later in the war, when I was drafted, I went down to the rationing board, and they let me put the oil burner back in. So then we had oil again. And then in 1974, we converted to gas. So we've had three different kinds of fuel in the same boiler, and they've all been good. Gas was a real bargain until the last couple of years, and it's kind of catch up. The original garage has been unchanged except for the doors, and I think as renovation and conversion go, this house would have minimal changes.
What about like the crime when you first moved here? Was there a lot, or have you seen a big change, or you hear more about it now?
I think the thing is you hear more about it. I have the feeling that, well, young people seem to be better behaved these days. They seem to be, traffic of course was much lighter, but I was much more aware of traffic, well, once I got a car. When I was a pedestrian, I was much aware of it. But I do know that the police used to run speed traps regularly for years. I went by Braeburn Country Club on Elmwood Avenue. I haven't seen that in operation for some time. The traffic leads me to something that's very, very good. We lived in Auburndale for 2 years. I was working in Boston without a car, and we didn't seem to need a car. Nowadays, the car seems to be absolutely essential. In those days, it was more of a convenience. The Boston and Albany Railroad, which was a subdivision of the New York Central, ran commuter trains as well as through trains. The through trains, of course, ran from Boston to Chicago and points in between. But all of the trains stopped at Newtonville. The local trains, the commuter trains, many of them started at Riverside and ran into South Station. Others started at Framingham, and then some would come from as far as Worcester or Springfield and make local stops. But in those days, you could buy a 12-ride ticket, and that took care of 6 days. Most of us worked 6 days. A 12-ride ticket from Boston to from Auburndale to South Station was $2.07. And I don't know what time the first train went in the morning because I never got the early train. But between 6 in the morning and 9 in the morning, there was service almost every 10 or 15 minutes. And similarly, in the rush hour at night, there was very frequent service. And in between, there were trains at least once an hour, right up to midnight. So most of the people who lived in Boston, who lived in Newton, I believe this is true of the other villages, wouldn't think of driving in a village. You would just take the train. And if you didn't want to take the train, the Middlesex and Boston Street Railway Company, headquartered in Waltham, ran local buses in Newton, including a line on Commonwealth Avenue, which ran from Auburndale Park to Boston College, connected with what was then the Boston Elevated Railway, right at Lake Street. One thing I remember about that line was that the bus would be parked at Lake Street, right across from St. Ignatius Church, and people get off the Boston Elevated and get onto the bus, and the conductor wouldn't bring up the fares. He wouldn't take the fares he got on the bus. He waited till he got a full bus. Then he'd go down the aisle, collecting the fares individually, but not ringing them up individually. And then he would ring, bing, 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 bing. And I used to try to count his rings and see if it matched the number of passengers, but I never succeeded. But that bus service was pretty good. That was 2 or 3 times an hour.
How long of a ride when you would take the train in the morning from here to Boston?
Well, in those days,
How long would it take you?
I had to be to work at 9 o'clock. And I think I would normally get an 8:20 train. And that would get me into South Station about 8:45 or 8:50. But it gave me time to make my 10-minute walk up from South Station to Homestead. So it was, this was a local train. This would make stops at West Newton, Newtonville, Newton Corner, which was the Newton Station. And then 2 or 3 stops beyond that, including Alston and Cottage Farm, which is now where the Boston University Bridge is. And then that Huntington Avenue, which was the B&A equivalent of the Back Bay Station. The express trains would go even faster. I was more apt to get an express coming out. They had some that would make their first stop at West Newton. And there was some that made one stop at Newtonville. But I think if you figure a half hour being normal,
When you said you got a car, when did you get one or what type?
oh, we got the car and right about the time we moved to Islington Road, which would be December or January. No, it wasn't. It was a little after that. Must have been the spring of 40. And the car was a 1935 Ford VA. We had that car right up until 1950. Keep car for a long time. I don't think I'd better tell about the
I was also wondering about the development of Auburndale. When you moved into this house, were the other houses on Ware Street, was this as built up as it is now? Or have you seen Auburndale become more built?
This village has been pretty heavily built up. When we bought this house, we had a good lawyer who gave us a very interesting report on the property. This location was the farm of E. Ware, W-A-R-E. And Ware gives his name to Ware Road, and that's on that, Ware Road and the Ware's Cove. And while this house was built in 1926 or 7, and I believe the house directly next to it, adjacent on Melrose Street, was built by the same builder at the same time. The house next to us on Ware Road was built by a different builder about the same time. I think the other houses on Ware Road may have been a little older, particularly on the outnumbered side of the street. The houses on Melrose Street are much older. They go back to the 1880s and 90s. In fact, at least one of them was in that book the library had on old architecture. We were talking about the railroad a minute or so ago, and the commuter trains used specially light cars. They were light coaches, and they had rattan upholstery or rattan cushions. They were real hard, but they were quite comfortable, very very lightweight, and had steam locomotives. And it's about the time that we came to Auburndale in the 1930s, the railroad had some new locomotives which differed from the heavy locomotive used on the long runs in that the engine and the tender were on one frame. It was one unit. They were not linked together like the articulated ones. And there were two series. There was the 300 series and the 400 series. I think the 400 were a little bigger than the 300. They were more powerful. But the cars of the train were so light, and those locomotives were so powerful in relation to the load they were pulling, that they had a much faster pickup than anything I've ever seen on rails anywhere else. But also, even so, they called for pretty skillful handling by the engineers. And it was very common when a train started up, it would lose its traction, and they go, and then it sort of recover and start out with a little measured pace. Now, I forget just when they changed from the coal-fired engines to diesel locomotives. I think it was shortly after the war, although it may have been just before the war, because when the service was still pretty good. But it was noticeable with that change how things didn't get as dirty as they had. We were so used to the grime from the coal fumes that we just took it for granted. And then all of a sudden it wasn't there. So there has been some progress there. In the village, one of my recollections is the corner of Elmworth Avenue and Lexington Street. Lexington Street comes out from Waltham and becomes Grove Street as it goes up toward Newton Highlands. There is now on the corner Garb's Drugstore, which when we came there was run by Dangelmeyer. It was the Auburndale drugstore, but Theodore Dangelmeyer ran it. Across where the Gulf gas station is now, there was a block of stores which apparently had been built in the booming 1920s, but didn't flourish in the Depression of the 1930s. But every year, come 4th of July, a couple of those vacant stores would turn into temporary fireworks stands. And fireworks was a big deal in those days. I was connected with the fire insurance business then, and I know that we used to dread the 4th of July. When they talked about a same 4th, they were out to save the public money, but that got changed. Speaking of the stores in Auburndale, where the drugstore is now, right next to it, there was a little economy grocery store. And the economy store was the forerunner of the Stop and Shop chain now. But there was not only the small economy store, there were two A&P stores just in this central part of Auburndale. One on Auburn Street and one on Commonwealth Avenue. Then there was Leonard's Market. There was Recco's fruit store. The Recco family, I think, still run the liquor store, but before that it was primarily fruits and vegetables. Old Willis Hadlock had the First National had a large store, but Old Willis Hadlock's place, which is now Russ Howard's insurance agency, Willis Hadlock in those days was in his 90s, and he and old Mrs. Hadlock could barely get around, but they had sort of a little variety store, and it's where many of us bought our papers on the way to the train in the morning. And getting back to the trains, the old Auburndale Railroad Station, like some other stations along the line, has been wiped out by the coming of the Turnpike. When the Turnpike came through, there had been 4 tracks, the 2 mainline tracks, then the 2 tracks used for the commuter trains. Commuter trains looped around up through Riverside and went by Riverside Station, which is not to be confused with the Riverside MTA station. Riverside Station was right where the tracks are now. But there was a branch that ran around from the Riverside Station. Too bad you can't get the gestures on the tape too. And became the Highland Branch of the Boston and Albany Railroad. And it's the right-of-way of the Highland Branch of the B&A Railroad that is now used by the MTA tracks for their Riverside line. I've got off the track now, appropriately. The railroad stations in Newton, the only one left is Newtonville. Is it? No, I guess Newtonville's gone too. Yes, they're all gone. But they were designed by a well-known architectural firm, I want to say Richardson. I'm not sure it was Richardson, but it might have been Stanford White too. You don't remember Stanford White, but he was the one who was shot by Harry Thaw because they both had the same girlfriend. The big scandal of the 1890s or so. But they were beautifully done, sandstone buildings, and the matched board interiors we didn't think it was very fancy, but the State Street Trust Company, State Street Bank, has the same sort of thing in their lobby now in Boston. But they were very substantial, good-looking stations. The station agent at Auburndale when I came along was named Bill. I don't know his last name, but everybody liked Bill. And we almost all bought our tickets in Auburndale rather than Boston, so Bill would get credit for the sales. But that was wiped out by the turnpike.
Now to talk a little bit about your family, I'd asked you about I had come across the name Woodland, and it's not your family that's the Woodland Country Club or the Woodland Dormitory.
No, I can tell you a little bit about the Woodland family. My grandfather Woodland was born in County Sligo, and unfortunately I didn't pin him down while he was still alive, but it was my understanding that he went to Dublin where he was apprenticed to a draper. But I've been told by other relatives that he didn't go to Dublin, he went to Belfast. Well, I think if he'd gone to Belfast, he probably would have stayed there. But anyway, he came over here in 1870 and went to work for Farley Harvey in Boston. And then went to Fall River, where he teamed up with a man named Quinn and Quinn Woodland Company and had what was supposed to be the largest department store in New England at the time. But by the time I came along, the department store was gone and so was the money. But so there are branches of the Woodland family in New Bedford, where John Woodland was in the grocery business. There are also Woodlands around Revere and Melrose, and I think they were connected because in the Woodland family we have a little tendency to run to red hair, and a couple of people I've met, the name of Woodland seem to run to red hair, but yet we're not able to establish the connection. However, I do remember a familiar name around Newton and Watertown in those days was the Woodland Dairy, and Charlie Woodland was quite a successful milk dealer. And I met one of that branch of the Woodlands once, and his first question to me was, "Are you a Swede too?" It seems their name was not Woodland, their name was Skoglund. They'd anglicized it. I said, "Yes, I'm a Swede, but not on the Woodland side." So we can't establish any connection between places. I think people just like the name Woodland. Although I'm sure the name around here ties in with this Woodland Park Hotel.
It is an old family name in the Auburndale.
I don't think it was a family name.
Yeah.
I think just the idea, here's the Woodland Glen or Forestdale or something like that. So I think that's where that name came from.
Where did you meet your wife?
Well, back in 1929, I was a sophomore at BU, and my father was dying, and I had to leave school. So I worked for a year, and I had various jobs. I can remember being a hotel clerk in New York at $25 a week and having trouble. I could try to live on 2 meals a day. I did. I kept my weight down. But then I had a chance to go down to the Cape. My uncle was superintendent of schools in Hyannis, and he told me that come on down, I'll get you a job. So I went down there, and I went the length of the main street in Hyannis, and everybody knew my uncle, but none of them had a job. Finally, I got out by the railroad tracks. It was a wholesale grocery warehouse, E.C. Hall's, and I went in and said, I'm Romy Fargo's nephew, and I said, I've never heard of him, but if you want a job, you can start Monday. So I was working in a grocery warehouse, and then I realized that even in those days, on the Cape, it was going to cost me as much as I was making to live, so I ended up looking for a job in a summer hotel. And I got a job at the Mataquassam Hotel in Chatham, and I worked there 1 year alone. And then the next year, well, I was there alone, but the next year I got a girlfriend who was one of the waitresses, and that's the one I married. So that's how we met.
And when did you marry? What was the year?
The year? 1930 was what? What, we were married or met?
Married.
Married, 1935. I was hooked from the first week I saw. I didn't realize it.
And she's from around this area, so she was new. She was not new to Auburndale, or
no, I didn't know that. Didn't even know where she came from. But Mrs. Woodland's background is Ossining, New York, and Springfield, Massachusetts, and actually she was in Newton long before I was, because she went to Newton High School. When I met her, our folks were living in Lincoln.
And how many children did you?
We have two.
Two, boy, girl.
A girl and a boy. Yes, the girl came first.
And so they're how old?
Let's see. The girl was born in 1938, which means she must be 44, 45. Wow. Makes me feel old to be the parent of a 45-year-old girl. And the boy was born in 1946. I know that because we almost had the government pay for him, but it was a little late.
And did they go through the Auburndale school system, or
they both went through they both went to the old Burr School. The Burr School is now the site of the housing for the elderly up here on Ash Street. And they both went to Warren Junior High, and they both went to Newton High.
Were you active in the school system while they were there, or was it a good school system? So that
the Newton school system is good, but it's not as good as they say it is. I accuse the Newton school system of being, I don't like to say, well, I'll use the word elitist. That's a word I don't like, but I think it fits. The Newton school system does a beautiful job with the geniuses and the dummies, and they just neglect the in-betweeners. My only connection with the school system was that for many years they used to have a Halloween party in the schools to keep the kids off the street and try to reduce vandalism. And I got involved in that. We were not exactly house mothers, but room monitors, either 1 or 2 years, and even then we couldn't keep up with it. So I managed to get in on a good thing. They had cooked up the House of Horrors. What they did was to get the kids into the school to begin with. They rig a slide from the playground, going down into the cellar, bulkhead cellar stairway, and then we'd have a dark room with occasional flashes of light and wet silk stockings hanging down overhead and that sort of thing. And we'd try to scare the bejesus out of the little kids. And the beautiful part of that was that once they got through our House of Horrors, we were through. And then the poor other suckers upstairs had to deal with them. Now that you brought up the subject of civic duties or civic responsibilities, probably the greatest we had was during when the World War II broke out. People took it pretty seriously, the possibility that Hitler might be bombing us any minute, and we used to play air raid warden. And we'd go up and down with a white helmet. I don't think I've got my helmet anymore, but I still have a whistle that I bought, and I still have the flashlight I bought in 1941. And if anybody had a light showing, we'd blow the whistle and yell, "Put out that light." But some good things came out of it. One good thing was for the first and only time we ever cleaned out the attic. Except for that war period when we were afraid of incendiary bombs, the attic has been a catch-all. And I think that's true of most people. But the really good thing was, for the first time, we got to know all our neighbors. Because we not only had air raid wardens meetings, we were calling on people and trying to find out how many buckets they had and that sort of thing.
So there was a real fear that Hitler might.
Oh yes, it was. Well, I can remember right after Pearl Harbor was December 8th, I guess it was. 7th. Yeah. Well, it was 8th in Hawaii. It was a day that will live in infamy. But about 2 days after Pearl Harbor, I got a call from whatever the head air raid warden was. I was at work, and he said, "Bill, get home right away. There's the air raid. This is not a drill. This is the real thing." So, didn't you come into Lake Street and meet me? And my wife came into Lake Street and met me, and of course it was just a false alarm. But it was good civic pride, and I rather miss that now, because at that period we not only knew the names of everybody who lived in this 2-block area, we knew them personally. Now we don't even know the names.
Yeah.
I hope we don't have another war to get acquainted.
On like weekends and for recreation, what did you do? Did you go to Norumbega Park?
We certainly didn't go to Norumbega Park regularly, but we did an awful lot of walking. We did a lot of walking, pushing baby carriages. And on the shopping, we'd go to Waltham by bus, more than we'd go to Newtonville. I guess we did go to West Newton occasionally. But it seems to me the recreation, well, maybe played house.
I wanted to ask about when you talked about Pearl Harbor. Where were you when you found out?
Pearl Harbor. I was playing air raid warden right out here on the corner.
Okay.
The news came over there. It was a Sunday afternoon, or Sunday afternoon we got the news. News came over the radio. I'd say probably just about sundown. No, that'd be my recollection.
What did you do? What was your work, your job? What did you do?
I forget what my title was then, but for a good many years, including that period, I was editor of a trade journal dealing with the insurance business.
And where did you work?
Right in Boston.
And you got there by train?
Yeah, I got there by train.
And how much contact did Boston have with what was going on in Boston as far as politics, or what type of effect did it have on Auburndale?
Well, I'm not sure what effect it had on Auburndale, but I know that I was much more aware of Boston politics than I was of local politics. I still thought of myself as being part of Boston rather than part of Newton. Incidentally, this is off the track, but it's something I would want to mention, and this ties in with the change in the community. When we first came to Newton, one of the things to do at Christmas was to ride up and down Commonwealth Avenue and see the Christmas tree decorations. and not Christmas tree, but Christmas decorations. And the Boston Edison Company in those days, I don't know whether they gave prizes, but they certainly encouraged lighted displays. Well, in those days, Newton was a Christian town. But since the war, with the coming of more and more Jewish families to Newton, particularly along Commonwealth Avenue, you could almost see the change by where there were lights and where there weren't lights. And you didn't seem to hear so much about Hanukkah. You just didn't see the Christmas lights on the avenue.
Transitions.
Yeah.
So were you active in the Boston politics, or you just were more aware of it, like who was mayor and that sort of?
Well, I wasn't active in politics. I used to cover the State House for my paper and for one of the New York papers, and so I was quite aware of what the legislature was doing.
Oh, so your paper was not just for the insurance, it was for all of Boston, or?
The circulation of the paper was New England, but it was confined to the insurance business. And so at the State House, I would cover hearings of the Insurance Committee, which dealt with legislation that was clearly insurance, some of the labor and industries, which dealt with workers' compensation, and occasionally judiciary taxation. I didn't cover the debates in the House or Senate. It was mainly the committee hearings.
Were you doing this when you came here in 1937? This was your
Yes.
So was it hard to find a job? As far as, was the Depression over at that point for everyone, or was
Well, I can tell you when the Depression was over personally for me. I graduated from BU in 1932, and I had a degree in journalism because I wanted to work for the New York Times or Saturday Post and be a foreign correspondent. Well, there just weren't any jobs. So from June, well, I worked on the Cape that summer, but from September to October, all of September and the first part of October 1932, I went around trying to get a job, and I found that the swerve I got was that you don't have any experience. So then I started out one week offering to work for nothing, and I called a man around a little insurance paper that didn't amount to much, but he said he'd hire me, but he said, I can't have you working for nothing. I'll give you $5 a week. So I got $5 a week, and I had the title of assistant editor. And he happened to be he was the correspondent, he wrote for the Boston Globe on space, dealing with the insurance business. It wasn't a regular column, but if he thought there was a hearing at the State House with an insurance angle that was worth covering, he'd send me up, and I'd see Leverett Bentley, who was this Globe State House man, and say, we'll take care of this, and then I'd go down to the Globe office, and I'd write his story with his name on it, hand it in. And he was also correspondent for 2 or 3 insurance publications. He was Plymouth County publicity director at the Grange, and he let me write all that stuff for him. And he was Kingston correspondent for the Brockton Enterprise, and he'd hand me a bunch of scribbled notes, and I'd write a column for the Brockton Enterprise a couple of times a week about things going on in Kingston. I didn't even know where Kingston was, but so that was how I got started. And I was there from October 32 to March 33. In March 33, the Standard, which was a weekly insurance paper that was firmly established, called me in and offered me a job, $25 a week. So I took it, and the next year I was able to get married. 2 years later. That's right. First thing I did was buy a car. Then after another raise, I got married.
And then you continued on in the paper for insurance, or did you branch out into another type of journalism?
No, I stayed there until 1959, end of 58, and there was Well, I functioned as editor long before I had the title, so I just say I was editor for 26 years. I was there 26 years, and I had the title of editor most of that time, and I did the work of editor all of that time. But in 1958, a job opened up. I won't call it cushy, but it was attractive. As secretary of the Mutual Fire Insurance Association of New England, which is an organization of local fire insurance companies. And they indicated that if I'd apply for the job, I could have it. I indicated if they wanted me, they'd have to offer it to me. I forget how we finally solved that impasse, but they claim I applied for it. I claim they offered it to me, but I went to work there, and I stayed there till I got pushed out at 66, 8 years ago.
Let's see. Okay, what attracted you to Auburndale when you first moved here? What was what made you want to come here?
Right. We were living in Boston on Park Drive, in a nice apartment. And Park Drive in those days was a hell of a lot better than it is now. And my boss on the Standard lived in Auburndale, and we were invited out to dinner. And naturally we went on. I don't know if we rode the train. I don't think we did ride the train. If we rode the train, no, we didn't. We came out on the bus, which was on Commonwealth Avenue. And we were a little early, so on the walking up from the Commonwealth Avenue bus stop to my boss's house on Central Close, we stopped and looked in the real estate agent's window. It was Johnny Gordon's father's real estate agency. And in those days, they used to have little 3x5 cards with the description of the rentals on it. And there was this place for rent, Commonwealth Avenue. And it sounded good, and so I don't know just when we called Gordon, but I know we came out on a Saturday morning and saw the house and saw the tenement apartment. I still tend to say tenement, but they saw the apartment and rented it. So, but probably the first attraction was that it was suburban and that it had good transportation. And somehow the fact that we didn't have an automobile didn't bother us because we knew it was easy to get in and out from.
Was it considered to be like in the country and far from Boston? I know you had, like you just said, you had the trains to get in, but
I didn't think of it as being in the country. No, I just thought of it as being able to be in a house where we were near the ground and might be able to mow the grass and get to know the neighbors. We lived in this nice apartment building in Boston for 2 years, and we never saw a neighbor to speak to the whole time. So.
It wasn't as it was built up in the sense that there was the other houses, but not like the hotels like that are here now and the apartments and all that. But
physically, it has not changed much. You see, Auburndale, even in those days, there were very few vacant lots. The territory is pretty well built up. I guess we belong to PTA, and we've had Mrs. Woodland was the den mother for the Cub Scouts. And I can remember taking some of those little rascals on field trips Saturdays. I remember one particular kid who said, "I'm going to sit in the front seat." I said, "You're going to sit in the back seat." I said, "If I sit in the back, I get sick." So I knew when I was licked. just hinted, I think, at one point about railroad people. The villages of Newton are probably 11 in number, but I always run out, and I never can make that total. But Auburndale is subdivided, and when we first came to Auburndale, here we are on the north side of Commonwealth Avenue. The area on the south side of Commonwealth Avenue, going up Grove Street toward Newton Highlands, toward Newton Lower Falls, was known as Angel's Rest. And that may be because of the congregational missionary home up there. On the other hand, our side of town was known as Devil's Retreat. But Ware Road, in particular, and the three streets off it, Owatonna, Kaposha, and Winona, were also known as Railroad Hill, and probably because there were so many railroad people. When we came to Ware Road, there were at least 4 railroad families on Ware Road itself. There was Joe Dalton, who was a conductor, and Arthur Deso, who was a conductor. Then there were a couple of brakemen. And then around the corner was old Bill Smith, who was foreman of locomotive engineers for the Boston and Albany Railroad. The word was that Bill Smith had a working locomotive boiler in his cellar used to heat his house, but I think that was apocryphal. So we got the matter of the Railroad Hill taken care of now. There you go, please.
Hurricane, would you talk about?
1938 was the first real hurricane, or first storm that was really called a hurricane that I can either remember or heard of in New England, although when I was growing up in Newport, we always used to talk about the line storm, L-I-N-E, the line storm during the early part of September, tying in with a storm to be expected when the sun crossed the line, across the equator at the autumnal equinox. But that 1938 storm made a big impression. I think it made a big impression on anybody who lived through it, and even more on those who didn't live through it. But I left work, I think it was a Monday. I left work that day at 5 o'clock and made my way to South Station with my then boss. And we had to hang on to the buildings at that time with the force of the wind. But fortunately, our train made it. I think there were some delays, and there may have been complete shutdown within an hour after we got home. But the storm seemed to increase in intensity during the evening, and Commonwealth Avenue is lined with trees, maple trees. Some of the side streets in those days had mostly elm trees. But the maples on Commonwealth Avenue were right at the curb line, and their roots extended more to the north than they did to the south. I think because of the gutters and possibly the salt on the roads, although I don't think they used as much salt on the roads then as they do now. But as a result, the maples were very susceptible to a south wind, and this wind came in from the southeast, and most of the trees on Commonwealth Avenue were bowled over by that storm. Although there was one big tree right outside of where the Star Market is now, where next to a greenhouse. And I can remember the proprietor of the greenhouse, I was out looking around when I should have been indoors, was very concerned about that tree, and he seemed to want me to do something about it. There wasn't anything I could do about it, but somebody must have looked out for him, because with all the trees down, that particular big one that he was concerned with survived the storm. It hasn't survived the March of Progress, though, but it's gone now.
Where were your children born? Getting back to your family and...
They were both born in Newton Moseley Hospital. which I think when Mary Jane was born was only called the Newton Hospital. And I guess we were Newton Wellesley by the time Peter was born.
Do you remember the time when you drove over there and what was, now how everything is that the men can be involved in the whole thing, what was
The men in those days had more sense. They didn't want to get involved. If I hadn't been bullied, I wouldn't have been up there. I spent the time in the waiting room, and Mary Jane was a very slow delivery, and we had quite a long wait. And I can remember old Doc Godfrey, who died a year ago incidentally at the age of 100. Old Doc Godfrey. Was it that? All right. Old Doc Godfrey, who died a year ago at the age of 105, was our doctor, but I think he was on the grave. Can we go off the record a minute? Old Doc Godfrey was our doctor, but he took an infrequent, an unusual vacation, and Mary Jane was late arriving, so it was Dr. Curtis who was the, well, anyway, all I can remember, you asked about the fathers playing a part in things. I didn't plan to play any part, but I do remember in the middle of the night he came in and said, roll up your sleeve, and had a thing that looked like a pyrene fire extinguisher, and took some blood right out of my arm all in one slurp. And so Mary Jane started out with an injection of her old man's blood. So that's all I remember about that.
You talked about going down to the Cape, or when you got your car, you did a lot of recreational driving. Where would you go?
We used to toot up to the North Shore and also to the South Shore along the old Route 128, which was not a route at all, but merely a string on the map connecting towns that went right through the middle of one town after another.
Okay. You were talking about your recreational drives to
Well,
certain areas.
You might almost say that on recreational driving we were brought up, because when I was a kid in Fall River, Newport, the Sunday thing to do was go for a ride. That was, just went with it. And the few years we were without a car, we were underprivileged. But we did very little overnight travel. All those days, I don't think people did go out as much overnight as they do now. And of course we had a live-in babysitter with my mother living with us. But in the summertime, almost every night we'd go for a ride. And on weekends we'd always go driving. But mainly to points around here, and largely historical places like the Concord, Lexington, and Marblehead. We did quite a lot of going to Marblehead, and also to the South Shore. Very little going to amusement parks. And we'd go to the Cape largely to visit my brother down there. But we go different back roads. We did an awful lot of shun hiking. I mentioned our first car a while back, but actually our first car after we were married, the 35 Ford. I can remember adjusting the brakes on it myself, and one Saturday afternoon I was going down Moody Street in Waltham, and the brakes locked. And just to illustrate how traffic has changed, I got out, I got under the car, figured out what was wrong, got the toolkit out, backed off on the brakes, and then drove off. And in all that time, nobody even tooted at me for being in the way. Couldn't get away with that now.
No, not in Waltham. About your childhood, you said you have a twin brother?
Yes.
Yes, and you were...
I was one of 4 boys. twin and I were the oldest. I had one brother 3 years younger and another brother 12 years younger. And while we were born in Fall River, we had spent our summers in Newport from the time we were small children. And then just about when I was in my last grade of grammar school, we moved to Newport year-round. So I think of Newport as being my home, or possibly more than Fall River. Here again in Newport, the thing to do Sunday afternoon was go around the Ocean Drive with the family. And when we got to be a little older, had the use of the car and used to go sidewalk snatching, and you get a girl to go with you and go around the drive and not look at the scenery.
You also said that you were drafted in World War II. What was your role when you were drafted?
Well, now, people sometimes say, what did you do in the big war, Daddy? And you say you were undercover operator or something. When the war came along, unlike wars since, it seemed to me most of us wanted to be involved in it. I always liked the German people, but I didn't like Hitler, and I don't think anybody else liked Hitler. But I always liked the English, the British. But Roosevelt, I don't know whether Roosevelt deserves the blame or the credit for it. Probably he deserves both. But there was a leadership. It wasn't the phony crusade stuff that make a world safe for democracy like Woodrow Wilson. But really, people did seem to be patriotic, and people wanted to be involved. On the other hand, I had a family to support, so, and as it happened, my twin brother had been in the Naval Reserve for years, so he was in from the very beginning. My kid brother was a student at Harvard and was in the ROTC, so he knew he was going. My in-between brother was then working for the War Department as a civilian, so he was sort of involved. But there I was, the only civilian in the family, so I went out to try to get a direct commission. And the Navy turned me down because I wore glasses, and the Coast Guard turned me down, I guess for the same reason. I didn't try the Marine Corps. They might have taken me. But then the Army turned me down. And also, well, I guess I didn't follow through on the Army because my boss told me that if I would wait till I got drafted, he would try to continue some of my pay. So I waited till I got drafted. Well, fortunately, I didn't get drafted until April of 1944. And I was then almost 35 years old. So when I finally got up to Fort Devens, it was at a time when they were pushing out people who had been hiding there ever since the beginning of the war, like some of the athletes. Fort Devens had one of the best baseball teams in the service, but they finally sent them off to war. And I think that probably when I got there, I released a whack for active duty, because when they found I could run a typewriter, I was stuck there. And in fact, after I'd been there a year, somebody discovered I hadn't had basic training, and I was tabbed as essential, so I couldn't be sent off for basic training. So for a period of 6 weeks, I had to do my work from 6 o'clock to noontime, and then I'd play soldier all afternoon. But my MOS, my Army spec, was 274, information specialist, semi-skilled. And fortunately, I was able to do the work, and there were 15 other people in the section who needed me, so they treated me with kid gloves. And that about sums up my military experience.
About Boston politics, about Mayor Curley, or you talked about Honey Fitzgerald a little bit.
Well, I haven't really kept very close tabs on Boston politics, but I can claim to have had very slight passing contact with two familiar figures. I've shaken hands with Jim Curley, but Curley was always regarded as a rascal, and he probably was. And the little that I know about Curley and his career, I feel that Edmund O'Connor really grasped back, portrayed accurately in The Last Hurrah. I remember shaking hands with Jim Curley on the station platform of the Trinity Place station, which was the outbound Boston Albany station next to Back Bay. I also remember one occasion when Curley became governor, and he made a big splash as governor. There was an organization in the insurance business known as the Insurance Society of Massachusetts. And the insurance business in those days was a fairly close-knit group. Most people knew each other. And the old Insurance Society had worked almost like a high school dramatic society. They used to put on musical reviews back in the 1920s, but that sort of fell by the wayside with the Depression. And by the time Curley became governor, which I think was 1934 or 36, the Insurance Society served only one purpose, and that was to put together a dinner to be tendered to the new governor by the insurance industry. And Curley's dinner was at the Copley Plaza, and it was a very elaborate affair. They had a head table with probably 30 people at it, and then at a lower level, but right up against the head table, was the press table where I sat. And I was right in front of Curley's place at the table. And the two things I remember from that vantage point was that while there were cocktails or drinks at every place, Curley didn't touch a drop that night. He drank when people were looking for him, when I wasn't looking. The other was, when he came in, the crowd went wild. And Curley was flanked by his military aide with medals and ribbons. And as they got near the places, Curley turned to his aide and said, so I could hear it, what the hell are they cheering for? Not a one of them voted for me. But Curley shook up the insurance business a bit, but not as much as some of the successes have done. The other well-known figure that I had a passing contact with was Honey Fitz, John Kennedy's grandfather. And even in those days, Honey Fitz was past his peak. He had been mayor of Boston. And one legend was that on one of his re-election campaigns, he passed the word, it's safe to vote for Fitz. He's already got his. But his main function, by the time I came along, was he was promoting the Port of Boston. I don't know whether he had a publicly paid job or not, but he used to go to the State House quite a bit and lobby for projects dealing with the Port of Boston. And I covered one hearing where he was working, and he came over and said to me, what paper do you work for, Sonny? So that was as close as I ever got to Fitz. The political atmosphere that I was most aware of was that dealing with the insurance business. And Massachusetts pioneered in the field of automobile insurance. It was the first state, and for many years the only state, to make it compulsory for every automobile owner to have liability insurance. And a good shortcut to election in many districts, particularly the city of Boston and the suburbs of Chelsea and Revere, was to land-based. Really, you didn't run against your opponent, you ran against the insurance companies. And there were some pretty lively hearings every year on the compulsory rates.
How did Auburndale fare in the Depression, and then into World War II, and then into
Well,
the
of course,
boom
we
years.
were, we were well into the Depression by the time I became aware that there was an Auburndale. But I think Auburndale probably didn't fare much better or worse than the other communities. But many Auburndale residents worked for the railroad, and I think the railroads managed to hold up their employment better than most others during that period. I do remember having a man pointed out to me in my early years in Auburndale as Mr. So-and-so. He lost an $18,000 job. And I thought, man, he must be a really remarkable man, which takes me back to my own personal part in the Depression. The year that I was out of college, I was looking for a job, and I remember standing in line in the employment agency, and my line led up to the window that said jobs at $18 to $25 a week. And I wondered how long it would be before I could stand in the line that led to the window that said $40 a week. I didn't get a job even at the $18 window though. Auburndale is largely a blue-collar community. If you had to make the breakdown, I don't know whether to say 50-50 or possibly in some neighborhoods like my immediate neighborhood, perhaps 60% blue-collar and 40% white-collar. But here again, I think this has changed to some extent. It was probably a higher proportion white-collar back in the 1930s than it is now. I think the blue-collar proportion has increased since the war. We do have quite a few city workers, and particularly firemen in the neighborhood. The railroad people have disappeared, just as the railroad jobs and the railroad trains have disappeared. The big change, of course, in the neighborhood has been that almost everybody goes to work by automobile rather than taking public transportation.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Let's hope the tape works.